Ray King, Day 1, Prologue. Are you awake, Will? Will? Wake up. It's time for your medicine, love. The face swung like a pendulum, to and fro, rose high up in a pink blur, dropped again, divided into 6 pink blurs, all of them spinning madly like wheels. He closed his eyes. He could feel sweat cold on his forehead, panic cold in his mind. I've lost it. I've forgotten. Even in the darkness, the world spun round. There was a great buzzing in his head, like rushing water, until for a moment the voice broke through it again. Will, just for a moment, wake up. It was his mother's voice. He knew, but could not focus. The darkness whirled and roared. I've lost something. It's gone. What is it? It was terribly important. I must remember it. I must. He began to struggle, reaching for consciousness, and a long way off heard himself groan. Here we go, another voice. The doctor, a firm arm propping his shoulders, cold metal at his lips, a liquid tip deftly down his throat. Automatically he swallowed. The world wildly spun. Panic came flooding again. A few faint words flashed through his mind in a way like a snatch of music. His memory clutched, grasping. On the Day of the Dead. Mrs. Stanton stared down anxiously at the white face, the dark smudged closed eyes, the damp hair. What did he say? Suddenly Will sat upright, eyes wide and staring. On the Day of the Dead. He looked at her, pleading, without recognition. That's all I can remember. It's gone. There was something I had to remember, a thing I had to do. It mattered more than anything, and I've lost it. I've forgotten. His face crumpled and he dropped back helplessly, tears running down his cheeks. His mother leaned over him, her arms around him, murmuring soothingly, as if he were a baby. In a few moments he began to relax and to breathe more easily. She looked up in distress. Is he delirious? The doctor shook his head, his round face compassionate. No, he's past that. Physically, the worst is over. This is more like a bad dream, an hallucination, though he may indeed have lost something from his memory. The mind can be very much bound up with the health of the body, even in children. Don't worry, he'll sleep now, and every day will be better from now on. Mrs. Stanton sighed, stroking her youngest son's damp forehead. I'm very grateful. You've come so often. There aren't many doctors who— Poof, poof, said little Dr. Armstrong, briskly taking Will's wrist between finger and thumb. We're all old friends. He was a very, very sick boy for a while, going to be limp for a long time, too. Even youngsters don't bounce back from this kind of thing very fast. I'll be back, Alice. But anyway, bed for at least another week, and no school for a month after that. Can you send him away somewhere? What about that cousin of yours in Wales, who took Mary at Easter? Yes, he could go there. I'm sure he could. It's nice in October, too. And the sea air? I'll write to them. Will moved his head on the pillow, muttering, but did not wake. Part 1. The Golden Harp. The oldest hills. He remembered Mary had said, they all speak Welsh, most of the time, even Aunt Jen. Oh dear, said Will. Don't worry, Sister said. Sooner or later they switch to English if they see you're there. Just remember to be patient, and they'll be extra kind because you're having been ill. At least they were to me, after my mumps. So now John stood patiently alone on the windy, gray platform of the small station of Tywyn, in a thin drizzle of October rain, waiting while 2 men in the navy blue railway uniform argued earnestly in Welsh. One of them was small, wizened, gnome-like. The other had a soft, squashy look, like a man made of dough. The gnome caught sight of Will. Bethsonbod, he said. Excuse me, Will said. My uncle said he'd meet me off the train in the station yard, but there's no one outside. Could you tell me if there's anywhere else he might have meant? The gnome shook his head. Who's your uncle, then? Inquired the soft-faced man. Mr. Evans, from Brinquag, the Wood Farm, Will said. The gnome chuckled gently. David Evans will be a bit late, boy Bach. You have a nice dreamer for an uncle. David Evans will be late when the last trump sounds. You just wait a while. On holiday, is it? Bright dark eyes peered inquisitively into his face. Sort of. I've had hepatitis. The doctor said I had to come away to convalesce. Ah, the man nodded his head sagely. You look a bit peaky, yes. Come to the right place, though. The air on this coast is very relaxing, they say, very relaxing, even at this time of year. A clattering roar came suddenly from beyond the ticket office, and through the barrier Will saw a mud-streaked Land Rover drive into the yard, but the figure that came bounding out of it was not that of the small, neat farmer he vaguely remembered. It was a wiry, gangly young man, jerkily thrusting out his hand. Will, is it? Hello. They sent me to meet you. I'm Riz. How do you do? Will knew he had 2 grown-up Welsh cousins, old as his oldest brothers, but he had never set eyes on either of them. Riz scooped up his suitcase as if he had been a matchbox. This all you have? Let's be off, then. He nodded to the railway men. Sut duck chi? Ayan, Delak, said the gnome. Caredog Pritchard. Was asking for you or your father right about this morning. Something about dogs. A pity you haven't seen me at all today, Riz said. The gnome grinned. He took Will's ticket. Get yourself healthy now, young man. Perched up in the front of the Land Rover, he peered out at the little gray town at the windscreen wipers. Tried in vain. Twitch creaked to banish the fine misty rain from the glass. Deserted shops lined the little street, and a few bent figures in raincoats scurried by. He saw a church, a small hotel, more neat houses. Then the road was widening, and they were out between trim hedges, with open fields beyond and green hills rising against the sky. A gray sky, featureless with mist. Riz seemed shy. He drove with no attempt at talking, though the engine made so much noise that conversation would have been hard in any case. Past gaggles of silent cottages they drove, to boards that announced vacancy or bed and breakfast, swinging forlornly now that most of the holiday visitors were gone. Riz turned the car inland, towards the mountains, and almost at once Will had a strange new feeling of enclosure, almost of menace. The little road was narrow here, like a tunnel, with its high grass banks and looming hedges like green walls on either side. Whenever they passed the gap where a hedge opened to a field through a gate, he could see the green bulk of hillsides rearing up at the gray sky. And ahead, as bends in the road showed open sky briefly through the trees, a higher fold of gray hills loomed in the distance, disappearing into ragged cloud. Will felt he was in a part of Britain like none he had ever known before, a secret enclosed place, with powers hidden in its shrouded centuries at which he could not begin to guess. He shivered. In the same moment as Riz swung round a tight corner towards a narrow bridge, the Land Rover gave a strange jerking leap and lurched down to one side towards the hedge. Braking hard, Riz hauled at the wheel and managed to stop at an angle that seemed to indicate one wheel was in the ditch. Dang, he said with force, opening the door. Will scrambled after him. What happened? There is what happened. Riz pointed a long finger at the near side front wheel, its tire pressed hopelessly flat against a rock jutting from the hedge. Just look at that. Ripped it right open. And so thick those tires are. You would never think. His light, rather husky voice was high with astonishment. Was the rock lying in the road? Riz shook his head curly. Goes under the hedge. Huge it is. That's just one end. I used to sit on that rock when I was half your size. Wonder what had banished the shyness. What made the car jump then? That's the funny thing. Seemed to jump, she did. Right onto it, sideways. It wasn't the tire blowing. That feels quite different. He straightened, brushing away the rain that spangled his eyebrows. Well, a wheel change now. Will said hopefully, can I help? Riz looked down at him, at the shadowed eyes and the pale face beneath the thick, straight brown hair. He grinned suddenly, directly at Will for the first time since they had met. It made his face look quite different, untroubled and young. Here you come down after being so ill, to be put together again, and I am to have you out in the rain changing an old wheel? Man would have 50 fits. Back in the warm with you. Go on. He moved round to the rear door of the square little car and began pulling out tools. Will clambered obediently up into the front of the Land Rover again. It seemed a warm, cozy little box, after the chill wind blowing the drizzle into his face out onto the road. There was no sound there among the open fields and the looming hills, but the soft whine of the wind in the telephone wires, and an occasional deep baa from distant sheep, and the rattle of a spanner. Riz was undoing the bolts that secured the spare wheel to the back door. Will leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. His illness had kept him in bed for a long time, and in a long blur of ache and distress and fleeting anxious faces, and although he had been back on his feet for more than a week, he still grew tired very easily. It was frightening sometimes to catch himself breathless and exhausted after something as ordinary as climbing a flight of stairs. He sat relaxed, letting the soft sounds of the wind and the calling sheep drift through his mind. Then another sound came. Opening his eyes, he saw in the side mirror another car slowing to a stop behind them. A man climbed out, thick-set, chunky, wearing a flat cap and a raincoat flapping over rubber boots. He was grinning. For no good reason, Will instantly disliked the grin. Riz opened the back of the Land Rover again to reach for the jack, and Will heard the newcomer greet him in Welsh. The words were unintelligible, but they had an unmistakable jeering tone. All this short conversation, indeed, lay as open and meaning as if Will had understood every word. The man was clearly mocking Riz for having to change a wheel in the rain. Riz answered curtly, but without crossness. The man looked deliberately into the car, walking forward to peer in at the window. He stared at Will, unsmiling, with strange, small, light-lashed eyes, and asked Riz something. When Riz answered, one of the words was, Will. The man in the raincoat said something else with a sneer in it, this time directed at both of them, and then without warning he broke into an astonishing tirade of rapid, bitter speech, the words pouring out flurried and guttural, like a churning river in flood. Riz appeared to pay no attention at all. At last the man paused angry. He swung round and marched back into his car. Then he drove slowly on past them, still staring at Will as they went by. A black and white dog was looking out over the man's shoulder, and Will saw that the car was in fact a van, gray and windowless at the back. He slipped across into the driver's seat and pulled open the window. The Land Rover lurched gently up into the air beneath him as Riz heaved on the jack. "Who was that?" Will said. Phil called Care Dog Pritchard from up the valley. Riz spat enigmatically on his hands and heaved again. "A farmer. He could have stayed and helped you." "Ha," Riz said. "Care Dog Pritchard is not well known for helping." "What did he say?" "He let me know how amusing it was to see me stuck, and some things about a disagreement we have, of no importance, and asked who you were." Riz spun his spanner, loosening the wheel bolts, and glanced up with a shy, conspiratorial grin. "A good job our mothers were not listening. I was not polite. I said you were my cousin and none of his bloody business." "Was he cross?" Riz paused reflectively. He said, "We shall see about that." Will looked up the valley road where the van had disappeared. "That's a funny thing to say." "Oh," Riz said, "that is Care Dog. His hobby is to make people feel uncomfortable. Nobody likes him except his dogs, and he doesn't even like them." He tugged at the injured wheel. Sit still up there now. We shan't be long." By the time he climbed back into the driving seat, rubbing his hands on an oily rag, the fine drizzle had turned to a real rain. The dark hair was curling wet over his head. "Well," Riz says, "this is nice old weather to greet you, I must say, but it won't last. We shall have a good bit of sun yet, off and on, before the winter bites down on us." Will gazed out at the mountains, dark and distant, swinging into view as they drove along the road crossing the valley. Gray white cloud hung ragged round the highest hills, their tops invisible behind the mist. He said, "The clouds all tattered round the tops of the mountains. Perhaps it's breaking up." Riz looked out casually. "The breath of the Grey King?" "No, I'm sorry to tell you, Will. That's supposed to be a bad sign." Will sat very still, a great rushing sound in his ears. He gripped the edge of his seat until the metal bit at his fingers. "What did you call it? The cloud?" "Oh, when it hangs ragged like that, we call it the breath of the Brennenlewid, the Grey King. He is supposed to live up there in the highland. It's just one of the old stories." Riz glanced sideways at him, then braked suddenly. The Land Rover slowed almost to a halt. "Will, are you all right? Why does a ghost you look? Are you feeling bad?" No. It was just—" Will was staring out at the gray mass of the hills. "It was just the Grey King. The Grey King. It's part of something I used to know, something I was supposed to remember, for always. I thought I'd lost it. Perhaps it's going to come back." Riz clashed the car back into gear. "Oh," he called cheerfully through the noise, "we'll get you better. You just wait. Anything can happen in these old hills." Cadfan's way. "You see," said Aunt Jen, "I told you it would clear up." Will swallowed his last mouthful of bacon. "You wouldn't think it was the same country. Marvelous." Morning sunshine streamed like banners through the windows of the long farmhouse kitchen. It glinted on the blue slate slabs of the floor, on the willow-patterned china set out on the enormous black dresser, on the shelf of beaming Toby jugs above the stove. A rainbow danced over the low ceiling, cast up in a sun spell from the handle of the glass milk jug. "Warm, too," said Aunt Jen. "We are going to have an Indian summer for you, Will, and fatten you up a bit, too, my dear. Have some more bread. It's lovely. I haven't eaten so much for months." Will watched small Aunt Jen with affection as she bustled about the kitchen. Strictly speaking, she was not his aunt at all, but a cousin of his mother's. The two had grown up as close friends, and still exchanged quantities of letters. But Aunt Jen had left Buckinghamshire long before it was one of the more romantic legends in the family. The tale of how she had come to Wales for a holiday, fallen shatteringly in love with a young Welsh farmer, and never gone home again. She even sounded Welsh herself now, and looked it, with her small, cozily plump form and bright dark eyes. "Where's Uncle David?" he said. "Out in the yard somewhere. This is a busy time of the year with the sheep. The hill farms send their yearlings down for the winter. He has to drive to Twin soon. He wondered if you would like to go too. Go to the beach, you could, in the sunshine." "Super. No swimming, mind," said Aunt Jen hastily. Will laughed. "I know, I'm fragile. I'll be careful. I'd love to go. I can send Mom a card saying I got here in one piece." A clatter and a shadow came in the doorway. It was Riz, disheveled, pulling off a sweater. "Morning, Will. Have you left us some breakfast?" "You're late," Will said cheekily. "Late, is it?" Riz glared at him in a mock fury. "Just hear him, and us out since 6 with only an old cup of tea inside. Tomorrow morning, John, we will pull this young monkey out of bed and take him with us." Behind him, a deep voice chuckled. Will's attention was caught by a face he had not seen before. "Will, this is John Rowlands, the best man with sheep in Wales. And with a heart, too," Aunt Jen said. It was a lean face, with cheekbones carved high in it, and many lines everywhere, creased upward now round the eyes by smiling. Dark eyes, brown as coffee, thinning dark hair, streaked with gray at the sides, the well-shaped, mottled mouth of the of the Celt. For a moment Will stared, fascinated. There was a curious, indefinable strength in this John Rowlands, even though he was not at all a big man. "Croso, Will," said John Rowlands. "Welcome to Clwyd. I heard about you from your sister last spring." "Good heavens," said Will in unthinking astonishment, and everyone laughed. "Nothing bad," Rowlands said, smiling. "How is Mary?" "She's fine," Will said. "She said she had a marvelous time here last Easter. I was away too, then, in Cornwall." He fell silent for a moment, his face suddenly abstracted and blank. John Rowlands looked at him swiftly, then sat down at the table where Riz was already poised over bacon and eggs. Will's uncle came in carrying a batch of papers. "Corpanade o de Carade," said Aunt Jen when she saw him. "De look their favour," said David Evans, taking the cup of tea she held out to him. "And then I must be off to Twin. You want to come, Will?" "Yes, please." "We may be a couple of hours." The sound of his words were very precise always. He was a small, neatly made man, sharp-featured, but with an unexpectedly vague, reflective look sometimes in his dark eyes. "I have to go to the bank, and to see Lou Thomas, and there will be the new tire for the Land Rover, the car that jumped up in the air and got itself a puncture." Riz, with his mouth full, made a strangled noise of protest. "Now, da," he said, swallowing. "I know how it sounded, but really I'm not mad. There was nothing that could have made her swerve over to the side like that and hit the rock, unless the steering rod is going." "There's nothing wrong with the steering of that car," David Evans said. "Well then," Riz was all elbows in indignation. "I tell you, she just lurched over for no reason at all. Ask Will." "It's true," Will said. "The car did just sort of jump sideways and hit that rock. I don't see what could have made it jump unless it had run over a loose stone in the road, but that would have had to be a pretty big stone, and there was no sign of one anywhere." "Great allies, you two, already, I can see," said his uncle. He drained his teacup, gazing at them over the top. Will was not sure whether or not he was laughing at them. Well, I will have the steering checked anyway. John, Riz, now that extra fencing for the fruit." They slid into Welsh, unthinking. It did not bother Will. He was occupied in trying to scorn away a small voice at the back of his mind, an irrational small voice with an irrational suggestion. If they want to know what made the car jump, this part of his mind was whispering at him, why don't they ask Care-Dog Pritchard? David Evans dropped Will at a small newsagent's shop where he could buy postcards, and chugged off to leave the Land Rover in a garage. Will bought a card showing a sinister dark lake surrounded by very Welsh-looking mountains. Wrote on it, "I got here. Everyone sends their love," and sent it off by his mother from the post office, a solemn, unmistakable red brick building on a corner of Twin High Street. Then he looked about him, wondering where to go next. Choosing at random, hoping to see the sea, he turned right up the narrow, curving High Street. Before long, he found that there would be no sea this way, nor anything but shops, houses, a cinema with an imposing Victorian front, grandly labeled assembly rooms, and the slate-roofed lich-gate of a church. Will liked investigating churches. Before his illness had overtaken him, he and two friends from school had been cycling around the Thames Valley to make brass rubbings. He turned into the little churchyard to see if there might be any brasses there. The church porch was low-roofed, deep as a cave. Inside the church was shadowy and cool, with sturdy white painted walls and massive white pillars. Nobody was there. Will found no brasses for rubbing, but only monuments to unpronounceable benefactors, like Grufrid ap Ada of Yanwick Hall. At the rear of the church, on his way out, he noticed a strange long gray stone set up on end, incised with marks too ancient for him to decipher. He stared at it for a long moment. It seemed like an omen of some kind, though of what significance he had not the least idea. And then in the porch on his way out, he glanced idly up at the notice board with its scattering of parish news, and he saw the name Church of St. Cadfan. The whirring sound came again in his ears like the wind. Staggering, he collapsed onto the low bench in the porch. His mind spun. He was back suddenly in the roaring confusion of his illness when he had known that something most precious had slipped or been taken away from his memory. Words flickered through his consciousness without order or meaning, and then a phrase surfaced like a leaping fish. On Cadfan's way, where the kestrels call. His mind seized it greedily, reaching for more. But there was no more. The roaring died away. Will opened his eyes, breathing more steadily, and the giddiness draining gradually out of him. He said softly aloud, "On Cadfan's way, where the kestrels call. On Cadfan's way." Outside in the sunshine, the gray slate tombstones and green grass glimmered, with jewel glints of light here and there from droplets of rain still clinging to the longest stems from the day before. Will thought, on the Day of the Dead, the Grey King. There must have been some sort of warning about the Great King, and what is Cadfan's way? "Oh," he said aloud in sudden fury, "if only I could remember." He jumped up and went back to the newsagent's shop. "Please," he said, "is there a guide to the church or to the town?" "Nothing on Twin," said the red-cheeked girl of the shop in her sibilant Welsh lilt. "Too late in the season you are. But Mr. Owen has a leaflet for sale in the church, I think, and there is this, if you like, full of lovely walks." She showed him a guide to North Wales for 35 pence. "Well," said Will, counting out his money rather reluctantly, "I can always take it home afterwards, I suppose." "It would make a very nice present," said the girl, earnestly. Got some beautiful pictures, it has, and just look at the cover." "Thank you," said Will. When he peered at the little book outside, it told him that the Saxons had settled Tywin in 516 A.D., round the church built by St. Cadfan of Brittany in his holy well, and that the inscribed stone in the church was said to be the oldest piece of written Welsh in existence, and could be translated. "The body of St. John is on the side between where the marks will be. In the retreat beneath the mound is extended Cadfan, sad that it should enclose the praise of the earth. May he rest without blemish." But it said not a word about Cadfan's way, nor, when he checked, did the leaflet in the church. Will thought, "It is not Cadfan I want, it is his way. A way is a road. A way where the kestrels call must be a road over a moor, or a mountain." It pushed even the seashore out of his mind, when later he walked absent-mindedly for a while among the breakwaters of the windy beach. When he met his uncle for the ride back to the farm, he found no help there either. "Cadfan's way," said David Evans. "You pronounce it Cadvan, by the way. One F is always a V sound in Welsh." "Cadfan's way. No, it does sound a bit familiar, you know, but I couldn't tell you. Well, John Rowlands is one to ask about things like that. He has a mind like an encyclopedia, does John, full of the old things." John Rowlands was out somewhere on the farm, busy, so for much of the time Will had to content himself with a much-folded map. He went out with it that afternoon, alone in the sunlit valley, to walk the boundaries of the farm. His uncle had roughly penciled them in for him. Clwyd was a lowland farm stretching across most of the valley of the Dysinny River. Some of its land was marshy, near the river, and some stretched up over the soaring, scree-patched side of the mountain, green and gray and black and brown. But most was lush green valley land, fertile and friendly, part of it left new plowed since the harvest of this year's crops, and all the rest serving as pasture for square, sturdy Welsh black cattle. On the mountain land only sheep grazed. Some of the lower slopes had been plowed, even though they looked so steep to have kept from rolling over. Above those nothing grew but bracken, groups of wide, warped, scrubby trees, and grass. The mountain reared up to the sky, and the deep, aimless call of the sheep came now and then floating down into the still, warm afternoon. It was by another sound that he found John Rowlands unexpectedly. As he was walking through one of the Clwyd fields toward the river, with a high wild hedge on one side of him and the dark plowed soil on the other, he heard a dull, muffled thudding somewhere ahead. Then suddenly, at a curve in the field, he saw the figure moving steadily and rhythmically, as if in a slow, deliberate dance. He stopped and watched, fascinated. Rowlands, his shirt half open, had a red handkerchief tied round his neck, was making a transformation. He moved gradually along the hedge, first chopping carefully here and there with a murderous tool, like a cross between an axe and a pirate's cutlass, then setting this down and hauling and interweaving whatever remained of the long rank growth. Before him the hedge grew wild and high, great arms roping out uncontrolled in all directions as the hazel and hawthorn did their best to grow into full-fledged trees. Behind him, as he moved along his relentless swaying way, he left instead a neat fence, scores of beheaded branches bristling waist-high like spears, with every fifth branch bent mercilessly down at right angles and woven in along the rest as if it were part of a hurdle. Will watched, silent, until Rowlands became unaware of him and straightened up, breathing heavily. He pulled the red kerchief loose, wiped his forehead with it, and retied it loosely round his neck. In his creased brown face, the lines beside the dark eyes turned upwards just as little as he looked at Will. "I know," he said, the velvet voice solemn. "You are thinking, here is this wonderful, healthy hedge of full leaves and hawthorn berries, reaching up to the heavens, and here is this man hacking it down like a butcher jointing a sheep, taming it into a horrid little naked fence. All bones and no grace." Will grinned. "Well," he said, "something like that, yes." "Ah," said John Rowlands. He squatted down on his haunches, resting his axe down on the ground between his knees and leaning on it. "Do. It's a good job you came along. I cannot go so fast as I used to. Well, let me tell you now, if we were to leave this lovely wild hedge the way it is now, and has been for too long, it would take over half the field before this time next year. And even though I am cutting off its head and half its body, all these sad bent-over shoots that you cannot see will be sending up so many new arms next spring that you will hardly notice any difference in it at all." "Now that you come to mention it," said Will, "yes, of course the hedging is just the same at home, in Buck's. It's just that I never actually watched anyone doing it before." "Had my eye on this hedge for a year," John Rowland said. "It was missed last winter. Like life it is, Will. Sometimes you must seem to hurt something in order to do good for it. But not often a very big hurt, thank goodness." He got to his feet again. "You look more healthy already. Buckton, the Welsh sun is good for you." Will looked down at the map in his hand. "Mr. Rowlands," he said, "can you tell me anything about Cadfan's Way?" The Welshman had been running one tough brown finger along the edge of his mattock. There was a second's pause in the movement, and then the finger moved on. He said quietly, Now what put that into your head, I wonder?" "I don't really know. I suppose I must have read it somewhere. Is there a Cadfan's Way?" "Oh, yes, indeed," John Rowland said. "Le Breur Cadvan. No secret about that, though most people these days have forgotten it. I think they have a Cadvan Road in one of the new Tuin housing estates instead. St. Cadvan was a kind of missionary from France in the days when Brittany and Cornwall and Wales all had close ties. 1400 years ago he had his church in Tuin, in a holy well, and he is supposed to have founded the monastery on Enley, that is in English Bardsey, as well. You know Bardsey Island, where the bird watchers go, out there off the tip of North Wales. People used to visit Tuin and go to Bardsey, and so, they say, there is an old pilgrim's road that goes over the mountains from Beckworth to Tuin, past Abergonnelwyn, and along the side of this valley, no doubt, or perhaps higher up. Most of the old ways go along high places. They were safer there, but nobody knows where to find Cadfan's Way now." "I see," said Will. It was more than enough. He knew that now he would be able to find the way, given time. But increasingly he felt that there was very little time left. That was urgent for this quest, so oddly lost by his memory, to be accomplished very soon, on the Day of the Dead. And what was the quest, and where, and why? If only he could remember. John Rowland turned towards the hedge again. "Well, I'll see you later," Will said. "Thank you. I'm trying to walk around the edge of the farm." "Take it gently. That is a long walk for a convalescent, the whole of it." Rowland straightened suddenly, pointing a finger at him in warning. "And if you go up the valley and get to the Craig Arden end that way, make sure you check the boundaries on your map, and do not go off your uncle's land. That is Caradog Pritchard's farm beyond, and he is not kind with trespassers." Will thought of the malicious, light-lashed eyes in the sneering face he had seen from the Land Rover with Riz. "Oh," he said, "Caradog Pritchard. All right, thanks. You look in far. Is that right?" John Rowland's face broke into creases of laughter. "Not bad," he said, "but perhaps you should stick to just Deutsch." The gentle thud of his axe dwindled behind Will, and was lost in the insect hum of the sunny afternoon with the scattered calls of birds and sheep. The way that Will was going led them sideways across the valley, with the gray-green sweep of mountain rising always before him. It blocked out more and more the sky as he walked on. Soon he was beginning to climb, and then the bracken began to come in over the grass in a rustling knee-high carpet. The clumps here and there of spiky green gorse, its yellow flowers, still bright among the fierce, trickling stalks. No hedge climbed the mountain, but a slate-topped dry stone wall, curving with every contour, broken now and then by a stile step, low enough for men but too high for a sheep. Will found himself losing breath far more quickly than he would have normally have done. As soon as he next came to a humped rock the right size for sitting, he folded thankfully into a panting heap. While he waited for his breath to come properly back, he looked at the map again. The Clwyd farmland seemed to end about halfway up the mountain, but there was, of course, nothing to guarantee that he would come across the old Cadfan's Way before he reached the boundary. He found himself hoping a little nervously that the rest of the mountain above was not Caradog Pritchard's land. Stuffing the map back into his pocket, he went on higher through the crackling brown fronds of the bracken. He was climbing diagonally now as the slope grew steeper. Birds whirred away from him. Somewhere, high above, a skylark was pouring out its rippling, throbbing song. Then, all at once, Will began to have an unaccountable feeling that he was being followed. Abruptly, he stopped, swinging round. Nothing moved. The bracken-brown slope lay still beneath the sunshine, with outcrops of white rock glimmering here and there. A car hummed past on the road below. Invisible through trees, he was high above the farm now, looking out over the silver thread of the river to the mountains, rising green and gray and brown behind, and at last fading blue into the distance. Further up the valley, the mountainside on which he stood was clothed dark green with plantations of spruce trees, and beyond those he could see a great gray-black crag rising, a lone peak lower than the mountains around it, yet dominating all the surrounding land. A few large blackbirds circled its top. As he watched, they merged together into a shape of a long V, as geese do, and flew unhurriedly away over the mountain in the direction of the sea. Then, from somewhere close, he heard one short, sharp bark from a dog. Will jumped. No dog was likely to be on the mountain alone, yet there was no sign of another human being anywhere. If someone was nearby, why was he hiding himself? He turned to go on up the slope, and only then did he see the dog. He stood stone still. It was poised directly above him, alert, waiting. A white dog, white all over with only one small black patch on its back, like a saddle. Except for the curious pattern of coloring, it looked like a traditional Welsh sheepdog, muscular and sharp-muzzled, with feathered legs and tail, a smaller version of the collie. Will held out his hand. "Here, boy," he said, but the dog bared its teeth and gave a low, threatening growl deep in his throat. Will took a few tentative steps up the slope diagonally in the direction he had been going before. Crouching on his stomach, the dog moved with him, teeth glittering, tongue lolling. The attitude was odd and yet familiar, and suddenly Will realized that he had seen it the evening before in the two dogs on his uncle's farm that had been helping Riz bring in the cows to be milked. It was the movement of control, the watchful crouch from which a working sheepdog would spring to bring to order the animals it was driving in a particular direction. But where was this dog trying to drive him? Clearly, there was only one way to find out. Taking a deep breath, Will turned to face the dog and began deliberately clambering straight up the slope. The dog stopped, and the long, low growl began again in its throat. It crouched, back curved as if all 4 feet were planted like trees in the ground. The snarl of the white teeth said very plainly, "Not this way." But Will, clenching his fist, kept climbing. He shifted direction very slightly so that he would pass close to the dog without touching it. But then, unexpectedly, with one short bark, the dog darted towards him. Crouching low, and involuntarily, Will jumped and lost his balance. He fell sideways on a steep hillside, desperately reaching his arms wide to stop himself from rolling headlong down. He slithered and bumped upside down for a few wild yards, terror loud as a shout in his head, until his fall was checked by something jerking fiercely at his sleeve. He came up against a rock with a numbing thud. He opened his eyes. The line where the mountain met the sky was spinning before him. Very close was a dog, its teeth clamped on the sleeve of his jacket, tugging him back, all warm breath, black nose and staring eyes. And at the sight of the eyes, Will's world spun round and over again so fast he thought he must still be falling. The roaring was in his ears again, and all things normal became suddenly chaos. For this dog's eyes were like no eyes he had ever seen. Where they should have been brown, they were silver-white, eyes the color of blindness, set in the head of an animal that could see. And as the silver eyes gazed into his, and the dog's breath panted out hot on his face, in a whirling instant, Will remembered everything that his illness had taken away from him. He remembered the verses that had been put into his head as a guide for the bleak, lone quest he was destined now to follow, remembered who he was and what he was, and recognized the design that under the mask of coincidence had brought him here to Wales. At the same time, another kind of innocence fell away, and he was aware, too, of immense danger, like a great shadow across the world, waiting for him all through this unfamiliar land of green valleys and dark misted mountain peaks. He was like a battle leader suddenly given news, suddenly made aware, as he had not been a moment before, that just beyond the horizon a great and dreadful army lay in wait, preparing itself to rise like a huge wave and drown out all those who stood in its way. Trembling with wonder, Will reached across his other arm and followed the dog's ears. It let go of his sleeve and stood there gazing at him, tongue lolling pink from a pink-rimmed mouth. "Good dog," Will said, "good dog." Then a dark figure blotted out the sun, and he roared abruptly over to sit up and see who stood outlined there against the sky. A clear Welsh voice said, "Are you hurt?" It was a boy. He was dressed neatly in what looked like a school uniform, gray trousers, white shirt, red socks, and tie. He had a school bag slung over one shoulder, and he seemed to be about the same age as Will, but there was a quality of strangeness about him, as there had been about the dog, that tightened Will's throat and caught him motionless in a wondering state, for this boy was drained of all color, like a shell bleached by the summer sun. His hair was white and his eyebrows. His skin was pale. The effect was so startling that for a wild moment Will found himself wondering whether the hair was deliberately bleached, done on purpose to create astonishment and alarm, but the idea vanished as swiftly as it had come. The mixture of arrogance and hostility facing him showed plainly that this was not that kind of boy at all. "I'm all right." Will stood up, shaking, pulling bits of bracken out of his hair and off his clothes. He said, "You might teach your dog the difference between people and sheep." "Oh," said the boy indifferently. He knew what he was about. He would have done you no harm. He said something to the dog in Welsh, and it trotted back up the hill and sat down beside him, watching them both. Well, Will began, and then he stopped. He had looked into the boy's face and found another pair of eyes to shake him off balance. It was not, this time, the unearthliness he had seen in the dog. It was a sudden shock of feeling that he had seen them somewhere before. The boy's eyes were a strange, tawny golden color, like the eyes of a cat or a bird, rimmed with eyelashes so pale as to be almost invisible. They had a cold, unfathomable glitter. The Raven Boy, he said instantly. That's who you are. That's what it calls you, the old verse. I have it all now. I can remember. But ravens are black. Why does it call you that? My name is Bran, the boy said, unsmiling, looking unwinking down at him. Bran Davies. I live down on your uncle's farm. Will was taken aback for a moment in spite of his new confidence. On the farm? With my father. In a cottage. My father works for David Evans. He blinked in the sunshine, pulled the pair of sunglasses from his pocket, and put them on. The tawny eyes disappeared into shadow. He said in exactly the same conversational tone, Bran is really the Welsh word for crow, but people called Bran in the old stories are linked up with the raven too. A lot of ravens in these hills there are, so I suppose you could say the Raven Boy if you wanted. Poetic, licensed like. He swung the satchel off his shoulder and sat down beside Will on a rock, fiddling with the leather strap. Will said, How did you know who I was? That David Evans is my uncle. I could just as well ask how you knew me, Bran said. How did you know to name me the Raven Boy? He ran one finger idly up and down the strap. Then he smiled suddenly, a smile that illuminated his face like quick, flaring fire, and he pulled off the dark glasses again. I will tell you the answer to both questions, Will Stanton, he said. It is because you are not properly human, but one of the old ones of the light, put here to hold back the terrible power of the dark. You are the last of that circle to be born on earth, and I have been waiting for you.